Nearly 20,000 rescue workers are searching for survivors one day after a pair of powerful earthquakes rocked southern Türkiye. Battling rain, freezing temperatures and hundreds of aftershocks across 10 provinces, rescuers are scrambling to find those trapped under rubble. The death toll has been rising every hour, passing more than 3,000 by Tuesday morning. The first international rescue teams have arrived in Türkiye following 8 pledges from several dozen countries. Monday's magnitude 7.7 and 7.6 quakes destroyed several thousand buildings, with Gaziantep, Diyarbakır, Adana, Adıyaman, Malatya and Hatay among the hardest hit areas. Turkey's Vice President Fuat Oktay says nearly 350,000 earthquake victims are being housed in dormitories, universities and shelters. Rescue workers have so far managed to save several thousand people, some who were able to signal for help via social media.
Annemin durumu iyi. Malatya Zaviye Mahallesi.
Mom is okay. I'm in Malatya, Zaviye neighborhood, Efuz apartment, second floor. My uncle doesn't sound well. Everybody who sees this, please come to help. Please, please, everybody who sees this, come to help.
Şu an herkes lütfen yardıma gelsin.
Sosyal medyada paylaşırsam arkadaşlarım hepsi görürsün.
I thought if I shared the video on social media, my friends could see it and they could reach us. And that is how they found us.
Meanwhile, Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency and the Turkish Red Crescent have begun relief campaigns for the region. The 8 agencies have set up hotlines for donations and are also asking people to donate blood for the thousands of survivors being treated in hospitals. International organizations, including UNICEF, are also running campaigns to help victims in the area. Now, for more on this, let's speak to Bahia Zrikem, the Norwegian Refugee Council Policy Manager for Syria. She joins me from Amman. Yakzan Shishakly, the co-founder of the Maram Foundation, a humanitarian NGO. He joins us from Gaziantep. And Stephen Hicks is a research fellow in computational seismology at the University College London. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talks. So, Yakzan, Turkey's southeast has been rocked by a pair of very powerful earthquakes measuring 7.6, 7.6 on the Richter scale. How devastating is the situation, you think?
Well, it was really difficult. Myself, I was in my apartment and the whole building shook like at 4:30 a.m. And that's really was not something I've witnessed ever in my life or somebody else witnessed. So it was really crazy. The whole area, people went out in the street and very early in the morning. I'm talking, the weather was very bad. It was cold, some rain, and I drove last night between Gaziantep to Marash, and I've seen buildings falling. I've seen building on fire. Honestly, it's something like I never imagined I would see, just like movies.
So how are you dealing with the aftershocks, and what's the mood among the locals now?
Well, it's really difficult. Everybody trying to get over what happened last night. The children don't want to go back to their houses, even to pick up their stuff. The community themselves, they're helping. We went to some small restaurant and they were serving free tea, free soups, and doing it as a shelter, of course, for free. And wherever you stop to ask somebody for help, they always support you. So what's really making things, I will not say much better, but it's helping the community themselves getting around each other, and the Syrian and the Turks at the same time, they're working together. When in the real time, everybody's supporting each other. Nobody asks, you go for bread, everybody give you bread. They're working together now.
So, Stephen, the area that was devastated is so vast and stretching thousands of kilometers. What makes this quake so different?
Obviously I'm not in Turkey, but when I woke up yesterday morning and saw this alert on my phone, I thought this is just the worst case scenario. I think it's probably the worst earthquake I've seen since I became a seismologist in 2011. So when we talk about earthquakes, we often talk about an epicenter. Mm-hmm. For big earthquakes, magnitude 7 or greater, the epicenter sort of assumption no longer works. The earthquake starts in a place and then rips all the way in a different direction. So imagine getting a piece of paper and tearing that piece of paper. For this earthquake yesterday, this rupture has ripped for about 400 kilometers to the northeast, close to the Turkey-Syria border. And so this has created a vast area of damage of equal sort of ground shaking intensity due to the shallow earthquake, the shallow depth, which has really caused the problems here.
So how have aftershocks, you think, added to this devastation?
Well, of course, yesterday we saw this, the secondary magnitude 7.5 to 7.6 earthquake a few hours after. This is not how most earthquakes behaved. The majority of earthquakes will have the largest aftershock being 1 unit of magnitude less than the main shock. So we had a magnitude 6.7. There was a magnitude 6.7 11 minutes after the first main shock yesterday, and that was to be expected. But what happened, it seems, based on preliminary seismological analysis, is that the second large earthquake yesterday happened on a secondary fault or a different strand of the Eastern Anatolian fault, which is why this earthquake didn't behave as for most sort of normal earthquakes based on averages around the world. A lot of earthquakes do not behave, do not conform to these simple assumptions sometimes, unfortunately.
So, Bahia, the earthquake centered in Kahramanmaraş has jolted, as we all know, 10 other provinces, causing heavy damage and, of course, casualties. How do you think search and rescue efforts are being carried out, and what are the main challenges?
So, speaking about inside Syria, where we have the expertise, what we can see is that the search and rescue is very difficult, mostly because a lot of people were themselves the victims of the earthquake. So there are a lot of people who are already trying to find their own families, to support their own children, and then coordinate with others to be able to support the rest of the population. So it has been very difficult. We also have a lot of troubles reaching out to people because the connectivity, internet, electricity, everything is down because of the earthquake, but also because it's a country that has been going through 12 years of war, and all the infrastructures were already destroyed or diminished. And so we also need to understand that search and rescue material is not really available in Syria. So there are no heavy machineries. It's very difficult to move the rubble, because they don't have the adequate material to do it. Hospitals are overstretched with people who have been injured. Some hospitals have been destroyed. So yeah, the situation is really bad.
So has any foreign aid reached the country yet?
I don't think any foreign aid reached the country yet. We are still assessing. The coordination is happening. The coordination of the humanitarian assistance is also done at Gaziantep level, which is where the earthquake started. So we have people have been, let's say, victim of this earthquake at all the different levels of coordination of the humanitarian assistance. And so right now, everyone is trying to gather again and to assess the situation as clearly as possible to be able to send the proper assistance.
So, Yakzan, how do you think the international community has reacted so far, especially for Syria?
Well, I mean, as Bahia mentioned, I mean, they're already coordinating in big levels and even at every level, actually, to respond to the emergency. And as Gaziantep was the center of response to Syrian northwest, as Gaziantep was hit, so we have people who have been evacuating from their house. They need to respond to people who also had to evacuate. So it's really a high situation. But some small NGOs, like the one that work for Maram, we started in like a shelter, temporary shelters to help people like temporary shelters, like just in between for 2 weeks until we find another solutions. So some NGOs, even international agencies, they moved faster than the coordination and start to establish small things within what they have in capacity within Syria.
So, Stephen, following these destructions and earthquakes, let's say, do you think there's a need for a collective response mechanisms on natural disasters, especially in the Middle East and the Mediterranean? I mean, what should be done to render more effective cooperation between the regional countries?
Yeah, it's an important question. As we've seen yesterday, earthquakes sort of break country borders. They pass through borders without any problems. So any political issues between countries. The earthquake doesn't care about these. So it's important to be able to see the situation across an entire fault rupture and to be able to act accordingly. I think the key is to be able to understand quickly which regions have been hit most strongly, which are the regions where there are most buildings damaged. And I think based on sort of crowdsourcing of citizen science data and from rapid satellite imagery, I think maybe some countries could work together on this to rapidly get the aid teams to where they need to be quicker.
So, Bahia, you've mentioned that Syrians have already been living with the traumas of the war and now they're facing it. I mean, how are they dealing with this situation and who is helping them at the moment?
I would say they're helping themselves. They are supporting themselves. I mean, those who have access to the most vulnerable part of the population and those who have been hit most hardly are the Syrian organizations who are on the ground. And as my colleague said, they are the ones using the response they already have to try and support those who have been hit by the earthquake. I think they are doing their best. A lot of them have been saying that they slept in their cars. They have been in their cars since 4 a.m. yesterday, since the earthquake. A lot of them are just going around by foot, trying to find their relatives, trying to understand exactly what happened. A lot of all neighborhoods have been destroyed. So everyone is really trying to assess and understand exactly how disastrous it is, and I think there is a next step that should come, which is how much we can support them and how much support we can provide and how quickly and efficient we can be.
So how is the war and let's say the ongoing conflict in Syria already affecting the supplies getting in and out of the country?
So the supplies getting in and out of the country is one of the most important question. Access to humanitarian assistance is one of the most important questions in Syria. And this access needs to happen by all modalities and all means, especially now that there is an additional disaster coming and adding an additional layer of suffering to the Syrian people. So we really need to make sure that all modalities are being used, including border crossings from Turkey, but also other modalities. All modalities need to be used for people to access humanitarian assistance.
Is Turkey helping them? Is Turkey helping them?
So there is the border crossing between Turkey and Northwest Syria is open thanks to the UN resolution, UN cross-border resolution, and this is where from where the UN convoys are entering Northwest Syria, and we hope that this will continue, of course, especially now that the earthquake raised.
So, Yakzan, we move back to Turkey. Rescue workers are battling very heavy rain, freezing temperatures as they race against the clock to find survivors. How grim is the situation?
Well, I've seen now, just like behind our office, people back in the street, some gas station start having some gas and some diesel. So people are trying to go and drive around and see, I mean, what they left behind, to check on their relative, to check other people who's not been answering their phones. So I think the rescue workers are trying their best, but the disaster is so huge. There is no way for only one country to respond. We need the help of everybody. I mean, we really need support with other countries, with experience, with equipment, with funding to help the people who, I mean, some people just like still alive, waiting for us to go look for them.
So, Stephen, the earthquake, as we've mentioned earlier, affected an area that covered 110,000 square meters. So that tells a lot about the scale of the destruction. But what does the initial aftershock epicenters indicate? It's important to be able to characterize exactly where the aftershocks have happened, because when we think of geological faults in Earth's sort of plates, in Earth's crust,
we think of a single sort of fault line, but actually when we go in to look more closely, these faults are divided up into different strands and branches. It's very complex. And as yesterday's second large earthquake showed, we can't assume this single fault anymore. So it's important to be able to map those aftershocks, to be able to identify, are there any parts of the plate boundary fault which have yet to release the stress through earthquakes? If so, are those regions some of the most hazardous areas? And the more earthquakes we can sort of document and analyze quickly, the quicker, hopefully, then experts in Turkey will be able to forecast the probability of aftershocks as they evolve through time and over the coming years.
So some say the plate moved so much. I mean, do you have any information about how far did the plate move? Because some say the earthquake displaced Türkiye by 3 meters. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we have this, like I said before, about a roughly 400-kilometer long portion of the fault. And at the peak, the maximum amount of movement on that fault was about 3 to 4 meters. So that sounds correct. And because the earthquake was so shallow, some of that movement would have propagated through to the surface. So that's why in certain places I've seen photos and imagery of cracks and ruptures appearing at the surface because the earthquake was so shallow. So yes, that 3 meters is basically 3 to 4 meters is what the collision of Arabia towards Europe and Asia, with Turkey in the middle, has sort of resulted in over the past few hundred years.
So what does that mean? Has the region become more prone to more major earthquakes in the future?
It's a really difficult question to know, and that will require more detailed analysis. Some previous earthquakes from northern Turkey and elsewhere in the world have showed that sometimes earthquakes can increase the stress on other faults, which are sort of adjacent to the main fault that ruptured. So that will be an important question for scientists to answer as to how much that stress has increased on other faults and how long those faults are, which can sort of contribute to the earthquake magnitude.
So as aftershocks continue, Yakzan, people are being asked to leave their damaged buildings and clear the streets for rescuers. I mean, how is the situation? What you've been hearing? I mean, where will they go? Do they have enough shelters or assembly areas? What you've been hearing?
I mean, I've been hearing, and I use myself. I went to the mosque yesterday. I stayed 1 hour. I slept inside my car overnight. So there is enough shelter to evacuate. But some other buildings, we're not sure if we can go back to or not. I mean, how I'm going to know if I'm a simple person looking at my house, if my building going to fall or not. So everybody's really scared to go back, even if they think it's normal, but everybody traumatized. The children don't want to go back to their houses. I was talking to a colleague of mine, he said, my children don't want to go back. They'd rather to stay in the car. So it's a really challenging time for everybody.
So on the other hand, yesterday, NATO said it is mobilizing support for Türkiye, Bahia, also Azerbaijan, Israel, and several of the countries, including Japan, are sending rescue teams. How do you think, how crucial it is to have additional support staff this early on? And is Syria expecting to have some support staff arriving on the soil soon?
I think it's very crucial to have support coming, and including into Syria. And I really hope that this support can come as soon as possible. Is it possible? I would say yes. If the international community and diplomacy does its best, we will be able to aid, should be able, and rescue should be able to reach, including Syria. Again, just to remind you that we're talking about a population that has already been suffering from 12 years of war, collapsed economy, a COVID-19 outbreak, cholera outbreak. Before the war, Syria was already going through the worst humanitarian crisis it has ever known before. We were talking about more than 15 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. Means more than 15 million people who didn't even have access to enough food, enough water, and a dignified house above their head. Now with this earthquake, we are increasing that number, and even the people who are already in very horrendous situation are now in an even worse situation. So I would call for a very quick response from the humanitarian international community, from the humanitarian community. I think it's really key that we deploy humanitarian assistance and aid as fast as possible.
But so far, how have you managed to coordinate search and rescue operations in the region?
As NRC, we don't have search and rescue operations right now. What we are doing is mostly trying to assess the situation and trying to distribute support, help, like water, blankets, fuel, food. So it's really the basics to the people to the people we work with and we serve.
So, Stephen, we say, Turkey's southeast has been rocked by these very powerful earthquakes, 7.7 and 7.6 on the Richter scale. It's the most powerful earthquake since the 1999 Marmara one. If you can compare the two, what would you say?
Yeah, that's it's a good question. Obviously, if we think back to 1999, I think maybe there was maybe some of the buildings weren't as well prepared sometimes because they're built earlier before earthquakes has happened. We hope that with time, as more buildings are developed, you have more stricter building codes and things like this. But the problem is also as in many countries around the world, populations have grown, since the late 1990s. And so when these earthquakes do happen beneath populated areas, they really do impact more people as time goes on, and that's the tragedy, really. In terms of the different the sort of mechanisms of the earthquakes, they are both similarly sort of what we call strike slip earthquakes, so horizontal movement of the plates across the fault. Of course, in the 1999 earthquake, this was on the northern Anatolian fault, so we have sort of there we had the fault which was parallel to east-west, whereas in the southeast of the country we have the eastern Anatolian fault, which is sort of oriented northeast-southwest.
Well, but this one's destruction seems much more bigger. So, Yakzan, we've seen pictures of a damaged highway in Hatay, and also Hatay Airport's runway was split into two. How will that hinder efforts to get rescue equipment and supply to affected ones? Are challenges getting bigger?
Of course, definitely. Every broken street would make our effort to respond much, much harder. But again, Turkey has a good experience. The AFAD team is working night and life, and I think they will use the military airports in order to deliver the aid on time and the equipment. Well, as you said, will be harder to evacuate the medical situation. I know that near Hanli at the border, yesterday they had to empty the hospital. They put the patients outside the hospital after the earthquake. It was cold, was rainy, but they had to do it. So yes, everything makes things difficult, especially the severe weather.
All right, Yakzan, Bahia, and Stephen, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.